Guest this morning is James Randi, president of the James Randi Educational Foundation, and our topic is pseudoscience. James, glad to have you back on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
This show, as I explained to you earlier, is part of a larger series on science and technology, and I know that you're especially concerned about the ways in which the public has abandoned science and embraced what you call pseudoscience.
Very much.
What do you mean by pseudoscience?
Well, science that has the trappings of science, white coats, test tubes, labs, PhDs, people who should know better but apparently don't. If it has the trappings, the appearance of genuine science, then the public is deceived into believing that it is real science. And a lot of pseudoscience is done by real scientists who have already established records in the academic field and in their particular specialty. But that doesn't stop them from becoming silly eventually and turning into scientists. Pardon me. It happens all the time.
Okay, could you give some examples? What do you mean by pseudoscience specifically?
Well, science again that has the trappings and the words and the references and the general language, the general setup, and looks like science, but is not actually science. Now, science, simply defined, is a search for knowledge of the world around us. And it has certain rules that the scientists have agreed to go along with. That is, that the evidence suggests a conclusion, but not that the desired for a conclusion suggests the evidence. You don't look into your evidence to find proof of what you would like to be true. You have to examine the evidence and come to the conclusion to which it leads you, and then set up a test for the conclusion that you've arrived at. And they must be the claim, the theory that you develop, or the knowledge or the picture of the world that you develop as a result of your experimentation must be testable. It must be falsifiable. There must be some way to show that it might be wrong. If I say that there's a blue dinosaur in this room, that's my theory, and I've got lots of evidence, anecdotal stories and whatnot to provide evidence of it, but it's an invisible dinosaur. You say, well, I can pass my arms around the room. Dinosaurs are pretty large. No, this is a very, very small dinosaur. I see. Well, I can't see it. No, it's an invisible dinosaur. If you keep on making up rules along the way that make it impossible for your theory to be tested, then you haven't got a conclusion. You haven't performed science that can be checked on. You may be right, but that doesn't mean that we have to accept it. We only accept scientific conclusions that can be tested and can be established.
All right, what are some of the primary examples of pseudoscience that bother you the most?
Oh, it happens in medicine all the time. We have medical claims being made. You see commercials on television, sometimes a half hour or even an hour in length, the infomercials, which keep on saying clinically tested. But if we don't know anything about that clinic, that may be some fellow just over the border in Mexico who works out of his bathroom. We don't know. Unless we know something about the clinic and the authorities who tested it and what their test consists of, we don't know much about it. So the words clinically established or clinically tested or clinically approved don't mean anything unless you can discover something about the qualifications of these people, because I can set myself up as being a clinic just by registering as a clinic, and that doesn't mean I have to have any equipment or knowledge about the subject. So that's the kind of thing that is being gotten away with increasingly, and the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, is not very alert to this sort of thing, or if they are, they don't do anything about it, or perhaps they can't do anything about it. Homeopathy, for example, is sheer quackery. It's witchcraft. It's a pleasant notion, but it has been tested endlessly, and in double-blind tests, it fails. Now, that's not made evident to the public. When they go into Eckerd Drugs, for example, or any large drug chain, they all carry homeopathic remedies. Now, it often says on the label, this is not intended to treat or cure any disease. But people don't get to read the small print on the labels and on the packages. They should be reading those things, and they should be made aware of it. It shouldn't be tiny print that's almost impossible to read. It should be evident right there that this is not supposed to cure anything. It's what we call homeopathic medicine, and in my estimation, it's worthless.
Okay, are there other examples?
For example, Sandia Labs recently and they're in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Very reputable lab run by very reputable people and supported by the Department of Energy and such, and they've always done an excellent job so far as I know, and I rather well know some people there, and I was just with them a few days ago. Now, they were asked by the Department of Energy to test a thing called the DKL locator. This is a spurious device, which is simply a dowsing rod with no connections to the electronics that are on the inside, and the electronics aren't even powered, so they're just sitting there like a chip off a computer, but not connected to anything. And yet this thing is being sold for tens of thousands of dollars to federal agencies around this country to locate aliens in trucks, Mexicans coming across the border, you can read for that if you will, and drugs in suitcases, and it doesn't work. Now, we've offered our $1 million prize here at the James Randi Educational Foundation to the DKL people, if they will give us a demonstration of this and show that it works. Sandy Labs tested it, and it failed miserably. But now DKL is saying they didn't know how to test it, even though the president and vice president of the DKL company were there, and they were the people operating this spurious device. It's simply a dowsing stick, and they don't seem to realize that, or if they realize it, they won't admit it. And yet our federal agencies are paying fortunes for this. The Border Patrol, Customs Service, all sorts of agencies. And that's our tax money going down the drain. But the FTC can't do anything about it. It takes them 3 to 4 years to catch up with these people. It only took me 25 minutes. I think I could teach them a lesson.
Okay, I know there are other examples, and maybe they're sort of on the borders of pseudoscience that you've mentioned in some of your works. The number of police, for example, that will turn to a so-called psychic to help them find a criminal or find a lost child.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those are things which at least have the trappings of science in that police officials, government officials will rely upon them.
Well, now that's an iffy question, however, an iffy subject. Has the idea that the police regularly go to psychics for this kind of help. That's not true. You picture yourself as a detective department now, and you know that your obligation is to listen to everybody who says they know something about a crime. You have to. It's your franchise. That's what you're paid to do. So if a murder takes place in the locality or any place, and some person comes up to the detective office and says, I know something about that murder, they have to sit them down and listen to them. And they can fill tape recordings, 90-minute tape recordings, 2 or 3 of them on both sides, and get nothing but things like the letter R, and there's the color red. So red has something to do with this, and I'm getting moisture of some kind. It may be flowing water, or it may be rain, and I smell oil as well, and it goes on and on and on and on like this. They have to record that. They have to listen to it. And the so-called psychic walks out of the detective department, goes to the press and says, I was just consulted by the detectives down at the local station on this murder. And that's the way it gets published in the paper. Not the fact that the police were forced to listen to this because this person just might know something. Not necessarily through psychic means, but because they might have been connected or they might have some sort of clue or impression of something that might have happened, and they have to be interviewed. Now that is the truth in a good 95% of the cases. In some cases, police departments have been unwisely known to call in psychics, and the psychics never give them any help whatsoever. Extensive research was done on that several years ago with the Los Angeles Police Department, and they found only 2 things. That the psychics were no good to the police, and all they did, the second thing, was they slowed down the investigation by having them dig up city dumps and swamps and whatnot and find nothing.
So there are 2 problems with these kind of cases. One is that the public has a false perception of the actual use of psychics by police. And secondly, even in the cases where they might have been consulted by the police, the results are of to no avail.
Yes, and not only that, but the public gets the impression through the media that the police are always going to psychics and that the psychics are helpful. Now, Dorothy Allison years ago lives in Nutley, New Jersey. She was called in on the Atlanta murders that were performed down there, and these young black boys. And she was called in on that, and they had great publicity when she went down. They sent camera crews along with her on the plane that was specially chartered to go down there, and they followed her all over the streets and whatnot, and with the police department, and she told them something like, I've forgotten, 104 or 5 names like that, that she said were connected with it. None of those names were Wayne, none of them were Williams, and Wayne Williams turned out to be the man who had committed the murders, and who was tried and convicted on that on very, very good good evidence. There's no doubt of it whatsoever. And yet she never mentioned a name that sounded like Bill even, which might relate to Williams. So she was no use whatsoever, but the press never followed up on that. I never saw anything on the news, and I've looked up every source I can saying that she was wrong. But when she appears to be right, and when she first goes down there, the press is right on her, and they give her photographs, long television interviews, whole special programs on her. She's interviewed on everything from Oprah through Larry King, and they make a big deal of it, but when she fails, they mention nothing, because the press considers that to be a non-story. And it's not a non-story, it's part of the story, and the public has the right to know that.
Okay, so in general, there really are two different issues. One concerns the extent to which people in power do believe or buy claims of pseudoscientists. The second concerns a way in which the media initially reports their involvement and fails to report their failures.
That's right. The media filters the thing out very carefully. Another example of that very filtration is such things as the A&E network some time ago did an interview with me on a biography program they were doing on Nostradamus. Now, that program lasted a whole hour. I was used for about 95 seconds in the whole thing, though they interviewed me for over 4 hours here in Florida at my foundation office. They interviewed me for all that time, trying to get answers they could use, but they couldn't use any of the answers, and the only time I appeared on the screen with a subtitle underneath me saying James Randi, author of The Mask of Nostradamus, the only time they used me was for biographical details, which they could have gotten from any dictionary or encyclopedia. They didn't use one of the things I said about the quatrains that were handled in the rest of the program, showing that these were totally erroneous interpretations.
Maybe then there are two different questions, related questions here about why individuals are inclined to believe pseudoscientific claims, and why and what role the media plays in perpetrating beliefs in pseudoscience. What would you have to say about both of those?
Well, the reason why people believe is they're looking for some magic. They're looking for some easy solution. They don't want to have to go through the thinking process. They don't want to have to go through the work. They want it all done for them. They want something simple, something they can understand. Now, we know very well that quantum physics is very, very difficult for the layman to understand, difficult for most scientists to understand. But that doesn't mean that it's magic. It doesn't mean that you can't understand it. It means sometimes you've got to put some effort into understanding these things. Otherwise, you can't just go to magic, go to some easy solution. I want to know about the future. Well, I can study the stock market. No, I can go to a psychic, and the psychic will tell me how to invest. Really? On the 1-900 psychic hotline, for example? Isn't it amazing that that particular service on television and via telephone that gave advice to tens of thousands of people every day around this country had 2,400 psychics working for it, and yet none of them saw that they were going to go bankrupt the following week? Not one of them. It seems to me that's a big advisory panel you've got there, and if the psychics can't figure out that they're going to go out of business next Monday, there's something wrong with their divinative powers, I would say.
Now, could you say a little bit more, too, about the media's role in all this? Why, I mean, do the people in the media believe the claims of psychics, the claims of pseudoscientists themselves?
Hard to say. Some of them do, some of them don't. I don't think, for example, that Larry King believes for 1 minute that the psychics he has on there are genuine psychics, but he knows what makes a good program. I don't think the media in general are terribly interested in whether or not the thing is true. They're more interested in whether or not it's attractive and if it appeals to the public. Now, I figure that's really a miserable way to look at life, in my estimation, and look at your profession. I think there's no integrity there whatsoever, if that's the case. Now, many of the media, we've got lots of friends in the media who will not promote these things because they know better, and they call us here at the JREF to ask us advice on the thing and ask us if we have information. We gladly share that with them immediately. But how many of them call us, we send them information, and they never use it? I've had major television programs that I can name major ones, such as 2020, for example, who some years ago did a thing on psychic surgery. They spent over an hour with me on the telephone getting information. I sent them faxes, I sent them photocopies, every piece of information I had, and yet they never used any of it. And the program they did was very supportive of this so-called psychic surgery that's done in the Philippines. It's all sleight of hand. It has never saved anybody's life. They don't perform real operations. It's total trickery. And yet the 2020 program saw, I guess the editor said, well, that's not the attitude we want. We want to be politically correct, so we'll accept everything these people say. And I'm sure that as a result, people